Yeah.
Oh, 3,
There
2,
we go.
1. All right, behave.
Welcome in, everybody. You've already gotten a good dose of the vibe today, so it should be a good one. We got Max Cohen joining us, fresh off of Inbound. Who
Hi,
better
everybody.
to represent the connected ecosystem that is such an important part of this customer platform we've been talking about. How you doing, man?
I'm good, buddy. I'm so glad to be here with everybody after Inbound. Thanks for inviting me.
Our pleasure. Originally, this was just going to be about connected ecosystem, but since it's the week after Inbound, gotta find a way to tie it to a recap of some sort. But I figured today we could talk about the people and the ecosystem piece of Inbound. And I'll just start there, throw it up. How'd you guys think last week in terms of, all these different partners coming together, all these different stakeholders, 15,000 people or 11,000? Was it 15,000 registered, 11,000 showed up? Yeah, lots of people.
That's a lot of humans.
It's a lot of friends. I think Inbound every year is such a beautiful thing. I mean, we spend so much time interacting with each other through LinkedIn, yet, almost zero time having any sort of face-to-face real interactions, right? It's so great to actually, get summer camp going for us, right? And make it happen. I was actually really stoked to kind of see, I don't know how many people are here on Partner Day, right? But kind of seeing the emphasis that they're putting on, solutions partners and app partners, like really working together and kind of like championing those relationships and making that show the importance of us all kind of like working together and bringing our own thing to the table, I think is super huge. Right. And also just like stoked to kind of see like what they're doing in the app ecosystem space in terms of like, making apps a lot more accessible for a lot more folks that aren't necessarily on like enterprise, right? Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with what we build over here at Happily, but a lot of the different apps that we use, right, require the use of custom objects. And with HubSpot, making the announcement of the object library, right, where they're starting to bring more of these like not, objects that aren't just contacts, companies, deals, and tickets, like, available to folks without having to create custom objects in order to be able to track those things is really cool. But like more, more, what's the word I'm looking for? More related to the app side of things. Well, I mean, app objects are going to be a thing now, right? So like, I think that's really good for a couple of reasons. One, selfishly for Happily, we love it because that means like we're going to be able to sell our stuff to folks who aren't just on enterprise, right? So it's going to make our stuff more accessible to folks that don't have like the ability to create custom objects, which is great. But I also think it's going to encourage other app builders out there that need a way to represent data in a way that's not just like shoving stuff onto contact properties, be able to kind of like reimagine the way their app interacts with HubSpot, right? And represents data inside of HubSpot without having someone have to be an enterprise customer be a barrier, right? So it's good for everybody. It's great for customers. It's great for the app ecosystem. It's great for solutions partners. Being able to give third-party app builders like a lot more control of what can happen in HubSpot. And then also like I don't know if people are either just glazing over it or not really understanding like the impact of it. Like one of the biggest things is that they're opening up those middle panel UI extensions up to the third party app ecosystem as well. So it's like, you're going to see all these different apps inject all kinds of wild functionality into HubSpot that they just weren't able to before because they were really just limited to shoving an interface in like a third, in like one of those right sidebar pop-out cards, or just like limiting it to like properties and objects and things like that. And so I think the amount of like new functionality you're going to see injected into HubSpot across all the different third-party app builders is going to be something really, really exciting to watch this year. So I'm stoked. It's going to be awesome.
So you call it exciting. I'm going to use the word interesting for a second. Because Max, I really want your thoughts on. So let's back up for a second because we're talking about customer platform. And one of the things that I've always loved about HubSpot is the fact that when you, especially as a trainer, when you go into HubSpot, you know what HubSpot is. Like HubSpot is this and it's that and it's this. And there used to be like back in the day a running joke of like, well, if you go into Salesforce, you never know what you're going to get because it's so customized that it's not even Salesforce.
Mhm.
Are we entering a world where because of the excitement, because of the flexibility, because of now I'm an admin at an organization, I decide to go work at another organization. There's a job description about being a HubSpot XYZ, whatever. And I go, yeah, I know HubSpot. But I go and I jump in their HubSpot. And now all of a sudden I'm like, wait, hold up.
What's
This
this?
doesn't look like this doesn't look like my HubSpot.
Yeah.
Like how, as somebody who's in the app system, like how are you guys maybe paying attention to, or how do you hope people, because again, historically you worked at HubSpot, like
Yeah.
how are we paying attention to this in a way that with the excitement, with the ability to do this, that we're not Salesforcing ourselves?
True.
That sounded like a dirty word, but I didn't mean
Yeah.
it that way. But like, how are we making sure that it's still HubSpot, clean, sleek, easy,
Yep.
usable, friendly? Talk
Yep.
me through that.
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of this has to do with thinking about how HubSpot approached like a lot of the middle panel card stuff and the UI extensions, right? Like when HubSpot allows developers to build that stuff into HubSpot, you got to remember like the way they build those things into HubSpot has to look and feel like HubSpot and not feel like a disjointed experience, right? So, if you're not like super into like the developer side of things, you may have missed it, but like a while ago, HubSpot released this like Figma design kit, right? And if you haven't used Figma before, Figma is basically a way that you can like mock up apps and stuff that you build, for really any sort of like SaaS product, right? But HubSpot made it clear to say like, hey, if you're going to be building stuff in these like UI extensions that add a whole bunch of new functionality between your app and HubSpot, it's got to look like HubSpot. It's got to look and feel like HubSpot. It's got to be familiar to the user so it actually like garnishes some engagement and it doesn't feel like a totally different interface or a totally disjointed experience when someone's interacting with those different elements in HubSpot, right? So one, I think it is on app developers to like make sure the experience that they're creating very much feels like HubSpot, right? But there's some ways to do that and some ways not to do that. But I think HubSpot's kind of put it upon itself to say like, hey, if we're going to allow third-party app developers to build in all of this new functionality essentially into our tool, it still has to feel like our tool, right? And they're very protective of the experience of users inside of it. And I think that's just kind of one way that they show it, right? But for app developers, especially ones that are like building something that's not necessarily an integration, but more so what I kind of refer to as an app, which is like something that you install in HubSpot and only use in HubSpot to kind of extend its functionality, right? I think it's really important that like whatever someone interacts with inside of HubSpot, right? But then if there's anything that they have to interact with outside of HubSpot, it's still got to feel like HubSpot, right? So for example, when we build Quote Happily, which is our CPQ, platform for HubSpot native quoting, right? The whole experience that a rep has is still contained within HubSpot. And we had to build our own interfaces, inside of HubSpot to be able to like control stuff, right? So for example, with Quote Happily, you get this like new UI that pops up from an app card on the right-hand side. But that experience that we give someone is all the design cues and the way that it's built, it literally borrows from HubSpot, steals, frankly, from HubSpot's like design, surfaces and styles and everything. And that's not because we were lazy and we wanted to copy it. We wanted it to feel like HubSpot because it's an experience that we're delivering inside of HubSpot. So it shouldn't feel like you're learning another tool. We want you to like see all the stuff that we're adding in there and be like, this unapologetically and genuinely just feels like the same experience I'm having everywhere else, only it's better, it's elevated, right? But even, in our admin panel, which lives outside of HubSpot, it looks like HubSpot. It's the same styling. It's the same tables. It's the same colors. It's the same buttons. It's the same, sort of like feel as you're walking through it. So even if somebody has to interact with something off platform and like they're in that admin panel, whether they're like setting up price books or building rules or creating approvals, or like whatever it may be, right? It's familiar to them. right? So I think it's like super, like obviously you can't do that all the time if you're just like an integration and there's this third party tool that lives outside of HubSpot, but you have this opportunity to build that functionality within HubSpot that feels like HubSpot, right? But I think if you're any sort of company building like an extension for HubSpot or building an app that adds to its functionality, if there is some kind of element outside of like the HubSpot interface that you build, I think it's important to make it still feel familiar, right? And you have that opportunity to kind of design it from the ground up to feel familiar for those admin users that like have to interact with it outside of HubSpot, right? So I think it's both on HubSpot, the company, in the way that they give these tools to developers, right? But it's also on the developers to ensure that they're taking all of that stuff and kind of continuing in that spirit of creating stuff that's familiar and easily accessible and very easy to adopt, because it doesn't feel like a different experience. It just feels like a natural extension of HubSpot.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. I never envisioned a day where the words Figma file would actually make me feel more at ease. But the fact that somebody's thinking ahead enough to like not have it turn into like an ish show inside the portal when I add in these different tools actually brings me great peace of mind. So that's great. Chris, can I ask one more question and I'll let you just kind of go wherever you want to go? Because as soon as I saw this, which by the way, notice I didn't even give you a chance to say yes, George.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I just
kinda
want to
rolled into
say
it.
for the group, like anybody's welcome to come on. It's not just, we don't just want this to be the Chris,
Yeah.
George, and Max show. So
Yeah.
feel free to unmute and come on video or not and join the conversation. Whatever.
Conversations, thoughts, absolutely. There's one thing that happened at Partner Day that I got excited. And then I was like, well, how excited are other people? And I couldn't gauge the room. And I also, to me, I was like, this is a really big deal, but I don't know if people think it's a big deal. So when they launched the fact that there's going to be app objects, tell me, from somebody who builds apps or works for a company that builds apps, the excitement or the narrative in the room to what that enables teams to do for us as HubSpot users and for the customer platform just in general. And Max, I would even say towards the end of that, if you can maybe even tease out, like, if you were to allow yourself to dream, what with this addition you feel like people could actually make that might not have been possible before.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the app object stuff, when that got announced, I probably everyone in the room heard me audibly scream, because it's honestly, like, from being an app developer, it's one of the things we've been waiting for the longest time, right? Like, it vastly increases our total addressable market for like who we can sell to, right? But I think the bigger picture here is that, like, we just swung open the door to this whole concept of like HubSpot for X, right? So like HubSpot for specific industry or whatever that might be. And I don't necessarily think that's just like an app object thing specifically. I think that's like a bigger conversation around like the beginnings of this like object library thing, right? Like, whereas now you can go in and like you can turn on these different like standard basically objects that like really let you use HubSpot for different stuff out of the box. Like, I can't wait for that to become part of like the natural setup experience. It's like, how are you using HubSpot? Oh, I'm using it for manufacturing. I'm using it for healthcare. I'm using it for XYZ. It's like, cool. Here are the objects that are unique to that use case, already kind of pre-built. You don't even have to think about it. You're good to go. And you can kind of like run with it. Right. So that kind of starts to get us into the place where you're starting to see like specific builds for HubSpot, and maybe even in the future, like white labeled HubSpot. Right. Yamini kind of like alluded to it. And I don't know if anyone saw it, but she showed these like, these three horizons for the app marketplace, right? And that third horizon there, she kind of like touched on just a little bit, was this concept of like products being built on HubSpot, which I think is like a fundamentally different thing than just like an app or an integration, right? Like, when we think products built on HubSpot, the whole idea behind there is like, one day there will be apps whose backend completely run off of the data inside of HubSpot. So the folks who are using that, for the folks who are using HubSpot, they can, send data back and forth between like whatever that front end app is. But then think about it. There's so many people that might work in an organization that have no business being inside HubSpot, that don't touch HubSpot, don't even know what it is, right? But they're performing some sort of like important business function that needs access or needs to be powered by that data, right? And so I think that is like super exciting because like that'll lead to eventually you seeing someone go out and build the POS system for HubSpot, the ERP system for HubSpot, the we want to build the booking system for HubSpot, right? And like the types of folks that like interact with a lot of those apps aren't necessarily going to be the ones that are doing a lot of the day-to-day work inside HubSpot. In some cases, sure, right? But like what's really exciting about that is that like you're sort of like extending the power and the data of and the information in HubSpot to other parts of your organization, or at least having the folks in HubSpot be empowered and informed by that data that's either collected or touched or manipulated somehow by other parts of the org that like don't even need to be inside of HubSpot, right? So like that gets really exciting for like 1,000 different reasons. But I think honestly, like even if you're just like a user of HubSpot, the exciting part about like the app, object thing is that you're going to see a lot of these brand new apps getting built on HubSpot that were limited because like they couldn't really build a proper data object structure or an object data structure inside of HubSpot. So you'll see just a lot better apps get built because of this, right? And then on top of that, you're going to see them like be a lot more natively integrated into HubSpot, right? Versus it being something like completely separate that gets installed, but it's because it lives in the app library. So you get a lot more control over it, right? So for example, right, it's kind of awkward for like Event Happily today because we have 5 different custom objects we install for people. So if you're in a place where you already have a bunch of other custom objects and like we're already kind of pushing that limit over, that means you got to go out and buy like an extension to your custom object limit, right? Which is weird. And some people might not use our sponsor and speaker object, for example, but there isn't really any way for us to like only give you some and not give you all of them. The Apple object stuff is going to be really interesting because an app is going to be able to inject a bunch of different custom objects for a whole bunch of different use cases, but you as the end user can choose to turn them on or not, right? So like you'll see these apps that build a lot of stuff, but you have a lot more control over the like as a user of what parts of that data structure you bring in, right? As long as some of them aren't like, paramount to the functionality of the app, right? But it's also not going to count against your custom object limit, right? Because you're not really thinking about them as custom objects anymore, right? So I just think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a lot better for folks to be able to represent data inside of HubSpot that needs to be represented separately from a, standard contact company ticket or deal without having to break the bank on enterprise and like build it all from scratch on their own, right? So a lot of good stuff going in all directions for all types of folks interacting with HubSpot in any way.
I think what's cool too, just speaking as a HubSpot admin, like I definitely share what you said, George. Like the anxiety about it becoming more like Salesforce. I hear it all the time. Like that's why people chose HubSpot over Salesforce. It was easier to use. You don't need to hire someone to set it all up for you, whereas with Salesforce you usually do. I feel like with HubSpot, we're reaching the point where you could need that if you did customize your portal to that extent, but you still don't need to. You could still, obviously the platform's still, they're making it easier and easier to use, especially with all the free and starter features. But I also think it makes it exciting for admins and, consultants, small agencies who want to differentiate themselves, where maybe maybe everybody says that they do HubSpot, but maybe there's not a lot of like HubSpot plus Happily experts or, HubSpot plus Super, whatever. So it just gives another leg up maybe to individuals to stand out and provide more value.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I've learned so much working with the product team and talking with them and trying to always figure out like why they're doing or not doing things, like especially when they can act so quickly on like the smallest of things, but then there's other things that kind of hang out for a while that everybody's asking for. And, to the same point of the guardrails, what are the 3 things, Max?
Oh, what for the 3 Gs that I talk about quite happily? Guidance, guardrails, and governance. There's a 4th one, but I forgot what it was.
Right. And that's HubSpot, in that we've definitely seen, at least I've experienced a CPQ experience in the past where they tell me, oh yeah, we can make that experience all inside of HubSpot. And then I talk to the sales guy who's on his 13-inch laptop, and he's having to use this little box and scroll endlessly just to see the second line of the quote. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe this isn't, the experience that we're trying to achieve. So I think all this little nuance into how and when they deliver the greater power basically it's never without, the guardrails and the guidance. And that's also why I always chuckle a little bit, but usually get pretty rowdy in terms of whenever something gets delivered and everybody immediately says, oh, I want to customize it. It's like you're missing the point here. If everybody customizes everything, it's harder to solution, it's harder to support. We do end up like Salesforce.
That's the thing, Chris. When we talk about customization, I hope that we can be advocates for a world where when we say customization, it's customization based on wrapping it around your business, not customization because we're pimping my ride. There's a complete difference there, right? One is just noise and nonsense, and one is out of legitimate need for the team. And it's funny because you mentioned the sales rep with the 13-inch laptop. I had a real scenario of that. They did not have a 13-inch laptop, by the way. It was my wife, and she has, I think it's 15-inch. And she was working with deals, and I literally came in and I'm like, you can hide that pain so that you can actually see your deals, right? But and even that, by the way, for her is a level of customization so that she can work better in the platform. And so it's I want to go back to Madeline when you were talking. One of the things that I feel like we're at right now, and by the way, this is from a customer platform standpoint, this is from a knowledge gap standpoint, and HubSpot Academy and all the things. I feel like we're in this state of gleaming the cube. Gleaming the Cube, by the way, is a great 80s Christian Slater skateboard movie. But if you go back to the essence of what Gleaming the Cube means, and it's like a Thrasher magazine interview, it's literally pushing your limits to the edge, right? You're gleaming the cube. HubSpot is gleaming the cube of what is possible to compete with Salesforce and not become Salesforce. They are right on the edge. They're pushing it, which is exciting, Max's words, interesting, my words, and I'm curious to see what it means for the future and us and the ecosystem as humans of HubSpot.
I think it directly speaks to the challenges we're seeing in the second leg of the ecosystem on this diagram, which is the academy. Because again, it's customization versus standardization is always going to make it harder to support from an enablement perspective. And oh man, I want to be, I love the meaning and everything that the academy stands for, but it's harder and harder to bring people in there and ensure that they're getting value without an immense amount of context and preparation to see it in a certain it's only going to be additive based on this other training that we're doing, and kind of how it fits into all this. We do know they're doing some cool new things like the external creators getting involved and doing more applied and situational trainings, and also the on the go videos. Did you guys
Well,
feel any of that, at Inbound or otherwise?
so as far as Academy, I only had one conversation, and then I'm burning to ask Max a question based on what you just laid out there. But knowing that there's other people that can ask questions and engage and be part of the conversation as well. I had one conversation. It was with Courtney Sembler. It was right after Breeze was announced, and I said, because I was curious, because there's been a lot of years where something would be released, and then 3 or 6 months later, Academy would actually have content for that. And so I asked her, I said, "Hey, how busy have you guys been to be prepared to launch stuff around Breeze?" And she goes, "Very busy. As a matter of fact, there's probably all the professors in a room somewhere launching about 21 pieces of educational content."
Not to be
And
specific or
and
anything.
and
You
and
got some inside info.
and I immediately was like, "Ah!" Because I thought about me as the human. I'm like, I wanna go watch all 21 pieces of content. I wanna learn all the things, but realizing that's not happening. That's not possible. What's funny is today we're having a conversation about the marketplace. You, Chris, then bring in education, to which then we have Max here, and my brain immediately goes, Max, how does an app marketplace, or how does somebody who's in the app market, how in the world do you guys think about educating the consumers, HubSpot users,
Hmm.
on your apps in like a
Yeah.
streamlined way when you know that they're already in an ecosystem that is like, look, for years we've been marketers marketing to marketers with like content marketing and inbound like, how do you guys think about educating people on getting the best out of the apps, or how should people in the app marketplace be thinking about this?
Yeah. I mean, well, it's, you know, I hate to be the guy that just says content, 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 but I mean, it is true. Like everything is content, education is content, right? I think a lot of it is going to come down to like using the tools that are really like, available to you, right? We have a strong knowledge base. We have a really big, content presence on LinkedIn where like all we're doing is just educating people on like how our stuff works, right? A lot of the stuff we do, it's like not necessarily like, oh, here's the app and here's what it does. It's more so like, here's how to accomplish XYZ in the app. And we try to make it fun. We try to make it engaging, right? I think the big thing for us too is like, we got to think about all the touch points that someone has, like when they install our app and how quickly can we get them to like an educational point. Like, so for example, whenever you install one of our apps, what's the first thing that happens? The Happily portal pops up and it gets you right to a video that says, here's the fast 5 things that you need to know. And here's all the resources that you get, right? So a lot of it is putting it in front of them, right? But I think a lot of it too is like making that educational content very accessible, very easy to find, but also like very engaging and fun, right? People aren't going to keep, people aren't going to keep like engaged with the content and really actually learn if it's not enjoyable, right? That's why school's so boring, because they're teaching you a bunch of stuff you don't care about and generally not delivering it in a cool way. But I think there's like another thing here too, right? I think historically the big problem around like training with HubSpot is that there's really kind of like 2 pieces of training, right? Or 2 sides of like the training coin. There's how most people use HubSpot and the stuff that you need to know, like how to point and click and do the buttons and do a general thing, right? But then there's how does your company use HubSpot, right? And this is why it's so important to have tools out there like Supered, Deanna, I see you out there in the audience, right? That allow you to add that additional layer of context into the experience that someone's having with HubSpot. I know, Deanna, you guys work with like a bunch of other different apps too as well, right? To be able to say like, hey, yeah, sure, you can go to Academy and you can learn how to build an email campaign and send it or this, that, and the other thing, right? But then it's like, hey, we've got all this like company specific verbiage in here, right? That Academy ain't going to train you at all on anything, right? About like this specific process that ABC company has, right? But it's like, Supered can go out there and basically like inject that education right where people are working, right? Where they're seeing it, right? So it's like apps that do that are going to be hugely important. I really want to see what Breeze and AI does in that realm, right? Because the thing is with the AI is eventually it's going to get to a place where it deeply understands how you use HubSpot. And that means like eventually portal to portal, right? Breeze is probably going to be able to explain a lot of the business specific context stuff to people, right? And deliver that in a number of different ways, whether it's just simply chatting with it through Copilot, right? Or, one day where it has some ability to serve up like intelligent pop-ups that it's giving to you knowing your business context, right? Versus just some stuff it's regurgitating from the academy, right? But in terms of like how apps are educating people on like how to actually use it, a lot of it comes down to delivering it in formats that people are comfortable with. Some people like video, some people like audio, some people like text, right? There's room for all of it. So like try to be format agnostic, right? But also just try to make it engaging and fun, right? And try to go like a little bit outside of the specific thing your app does, right? Put it in the context of the rest of the tool and all the things it potentially touches, right? Like for example, with Event Happily, if you think about like what we inject into a portal, we give you some workflow actions, some objects, and some CMS modules. If you want to look at like the literal what you get when you pay for it, right? But we touch things like HubSpot payments. So like we got to educate people on HubSpot payments. Otherwise, they're not going to know how to like sell a ticket to an event, right? We got to educate people on CMS stuff. Otherwise, they're not going to understand the context of dynamic content and how that plays into like our, form modules that help you do multi-person registration, right? So it's like you got to touch what your app does, obviously, but educate how people can use the other parts of the platform and how it interacts with it, even if that feature in HubSpot is not something that your app built, right? All of this stuff touches each other, right? In all these different ways. Like I can't think of another platform where all the features work together as well as they do, right? And everything is connected, right? And that's really important to kind of weave in those other educational bits about the platform that your app is existing in so they can get the most out of it and put it into context to all this other stuff that's sitting in there, right? So, that's kind of like what I would encourage people to do. It's like, listen, don't just educate people about the features of your app, educate people on how they can take the other stuff in HubSpot and how it has an effect on it, right? And how to use it in tandem with whatever it is that, whatever value your app brings essentially. Yeah.
Man.
Conflicted.
So,
Why?
Why are you conflicted?
So no, it's crazy because you made my brain go in a certain direction with that, Max, of like, and I literally was like, oh, when I hear Max talking about this, it's like, it's almost like my brain was like, oh, so like companies need to hire like an internal trainer to like be able to train their humans on how to do the thing. And so I literally was like, well, I got curious. And so, I did a little research real quick, and like large enterprise companies probably already have this. It's L&D, right? Learning and development. But what's funny is I got some stats here, like 80% of large companies, 1,000 plus employees have that learning and development portion.
Enablement.
What's crazy to me, when we go to medium-sized companies, which by the way, for years, HubSpot's target market, small to medium-sized businesses. If we go medium-sized companies, it drops to like 50 to 70% of those companies might have this in their arsenal. Small businesses, it's like, oh God,
They
like
don't.
20 to 30, maybe 20 to 30. And so all of a sudden I start to think about like, how do you take organizations that haven't had, or a large percentage haven't had, how do you then lean into, Max, like you're talking with Breeze and AI, because there's going to have to be some training of it to get the best teaching out of it. So how's an organization that hasn't had an internal trainer or learning and development going to actually know what to give the machine to then actually have the machine teach in the right way? That's what I'm conflicted about as I listen to you talk, by the way. Just small stuff, like tiny things of like how does AI not teach you the wrong ish?
Well, there's a huge opportunity there. Like instead of worrying about replacement, those are all the people that turn into enablement and all the other things that a lot of leaders know they've been missing. They just couldn't figure out how to make it matter to their bottom line, even though it matters more than most other things they're doing. And it was like the concept of enablement was just impossibly difficult to sell, even in bigger organizations, because it is very hard to directly tie it to ROI of any kind. But that's where I think this is a little different. And this is where the advantage of doing the AI inside of HubSpot versus going to ChatGPT or other places to do it. In theory, and I say this to any product manager who will listen, the the ability to use AI to coach instead of to do is going to be massive should we choose to use it that way. I don't always see them focusing on um, non-functional use cases, but like being able to draw from the way, and I think this was the only way that when Einstein first came out, they tried to do stuff like this. It's like, well, if your deal stages look like this, you should be at this kind of close rate, and maybe you can do these kinds of things. Now it's like to if they can focus on usability of the system, I think it's different at this point because now the AI, like it doesn't have to be 100% on the humans to tell the AI what needs to be done and how the situation can be helped, which is very different from if I'm on the front line and even if I'm not getting the enablement, I'm tired of working out of spreadsheets. The difference between signing up for free HubSpot and just starting to use it as a CRM, it's all on me at that point to make it work for me. Now, with the AI element, it's not all on me anymore. So that maybe the fact that it's not the entire mountain, we can start some way up the mountain, will help people, start to move into that enablement space. But like I said at the beginning, like there are a ton of people who would love to provide more value than the data entry value that you're asking them to do.
Yeah.
And those are the ones I would look to.
Yeah. I love how my brain literally plays volleyball as you guys are talking. Because not that I want to turn this into an AI conversation, because we are here to talk about the marketplace portion of the customer platform. But I immediately went to, wow, I wonder if Happily is paying attention or thinking about how AI plays like I envision a world where like Event Happily, I'm shilling for anyway.
Keep shilling, baby.
I imagine a world where Event Happily has a layer of AI to like do things or understand things or present things and like how much are you guys, or how much do you think the app ecosystem, app partners should be thinking about the layer in which they're using or implementing AI into the tool that of HubSpot that is also already using AI?
I mean, as much as they should be, as long as there's like a utility for it, right? I mean, we're looking into AI for some of the other apps that we're building that are kind of secret projects at the moment, right? Just because it like directly ties into what it does.
Yeah. I see what you did there.
Yeah, we got some fun stuff coming. I mean, but I think the thing is like for us, we have to like go build that first for something that's like more of an AI first product before we kind of, figure out how to build it into the existing stuff that we have, right? Because we're not like building a bunch of AI products. We haven't been doing that, right? But like we're starting to dabble in it, right? So I'd say, don't. It's so easy to just like rush into the AI thing just because you think you have to, just because everybody else is, right? Like I'd say with anything else, like there has to be like a very specific utility and a unique implementation of it to make it worth it, right? And it's got to make sense. It doesn't just just have AI to have AI, right? But just like any other independent SaaS provider, or company building a tool. It's like, sure, you should be looking at AI if it's going to like help, someone interact with the data better or do something inside of the tool with these or whatever it may be. But only when it makes sense, because that can be expensive and difficult. And, you could just create another one of these like, buzzworthy AI tools that no one really cares about and doesn't deliver a ton of value. But
So I've got a question for you guys. First of all, I really appreciate the vision that you have in your apps, and I understand you're out not just to help people, you're out to make money.
Sure.
And appreciate that. And you're building on weaknesses in HubSpot that at some point they will probably get around to catching up to you. So
sure. Yeah.
Here's our struggle as a nonprofit. We have gone all in with HubSpot at an economic investment that's beyond what we would normally have done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going head forward. Chris can attest to the fact that we encountered something that was like crap, and we had to find a solution really quickly and helped us with the whole deliverables model. But I'm just curious with you guys, how do you walk that tension between your own businesses, the HubSpot ecosystem, working with nonprofits who are also non-budget people? It's just more of a curiosity thing, because we would love to figure out ways that we can collaborate, cooperate, and contribute in the whole ecosystem, because as that happens, the whole product is better and everybody's experience is better.
Was that question specifically for me or for the group?
for the group, for you. I mean, just in general, is it a valid question? Is it something that you guys think through? I mean, It's a great product and it's growing. You can't keep up with all of the things that are changing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just like chart your path. Yeah. And then figure out when you diverge from that, and then going forward. So
yeah, and I feel so unprepared to have a lot of these conversations, just because I'll tell you, Jeff, my toxic trait when I worked at HubSpot was not at all involving myself and paying attention to how much the thing cost, because it would always sour my ability to be very enthusiastic and excited about it, because I'd be so pumped about it and then I'd be like, oh shit, it costs that much money, that's crazy. And it would be tough for me. I think HubSpot I think has to do a lot more in order to make their stuff more affordable to folks who would greatly benefit from it, like not only in the nonprofit space, but like I think in the education space too as well. Like you see them do the whole HubSpot for startups thing, but like, where's HubSpot for nonprofits? Where's HubSpot for EDU? Now I hope that they'll get to a place for that eventually, especially when you start thinking about this whole HubSpot for X conversation, right? Where you've got a much easier way to deploy HubSpot in a way that is set up already to be more relevant to a school using it, to a medical related company using it, to a nonprofit using it, and having something built out of the box that's like super easy to deploy and easy to get into the hands of folks that are using it for less of like a B2B sales use case. What that would make me hope is that would encourage them to go to market with HubSpot in different ways, right? And part of those things that they got to understand is like, hey, if we're going to make a HubSpot build for education, if we're going to make a HubSpot build for nonprofits, and it's something that you can get out of the box, well, we probably can't sell it in the same package that is, probably much easier for a B2B company making a boatload of money to be able to purchase, right? But something that's like a little bit more financially palatable to, an organization that's going to just buy the way they operate is going to have less resources for technology, right? So I really hope that HubSpot kind of like reconsiders the way to go to market, especially since you're going to see them transition to like go to market with these more HubSpot for X sort of like pre-built packages that are much easier for them to deploy, that don't rely on going and hiring a partner to go build you 1,000 different custom objects and a bunch of different stuff to make it relevant to your industry, right? But I think the hope there is that they'd probably see a lot more success with organizations like that, which would hopefully encourage them to be able to like sell it at a price that's more competitive to the other solutions that those companies look at that are purpose built for that thing, right? I'm not sure if it's because they don't have as much of a demand from those companies that they don't, do anything to kind of like help them out on the cost side. Like I know there used to be like a whole HubSpot for educations and used to be a whole HubSpot for nonprofits, like SWAT team that was like selling just to those companies. But like, I don't know how much that stuff exists anymore. Right. But, I would hope that since you're going to kind of see these out of box versions of the product naturally evolve over time to be able to serve those different areas that HubSpot has not been that great at kind of serving over the years, that they would change up their GTM strategy, especially from a pricing point, to be able to serve those people better. Right. But that's also me just not having any sort of economics brain whatsoever and just hoping and praying that they'll do the right thing. Right. But I don't know if anyone else has a take on that.
So actually the question, when Jeff was asking the question, the thing that got me intrigued and my brain pulled out, Max, is like, I'm sitting here looking at the marketplace, and if you filter out apps built by HubSpot, you have 1,558 results, right? That's 1,558 apps that you might be able to use to make your business better. But then also I think about this template library, the objects library that we've been talking about, and I think about these app partners and what happens. You've got a business, you're selling apps. Not to be a Debbie Downer, Max, but let's just say you're selling an app that is for people who do events. And all of a sudden, HubSpot adds the events object template to HubSpot.
Oh, they're gonna.
Right.
Right.
So, but how do you live in a world where that your bread and butter, the thing that you're building, the gap that you're solving for that Jeff mentioned, every day is probably closing itself by some developer that works for the company that you're selling your app for? Like, do you guys is that maybe? I don't want to answer because I know me, I immediately go, why would bob and weave and pivot and transition and always be, but like, how do you guys have conversations? Should app partners be thinking about that? Like, this is not the sexy side of the conversation, right? But like, where does your brain go when we bring that up?
Yeah, totally. So there is, again, the way that I kind of think of things that you see in the app marketplace, there are integrations, right? So third-party tool that you would use regardless of if you're using HubSpot or not, but you want to get it to talk to HubSpot. To me, that's an integration. An app would be, hey, we're adding this net new functionality into HubSpot, right? And then a product would be a whole suite of tools that can't just be knocked over by like a single feature getting changed or something like that, right? We've had apps like you saw it with Associate, right? Now, you could make arguments that Associate is better than some of the native stuff that HubSpot released, which it definitely is. But like, essentially they took everything that our app did and they built it on their own, right? They did it in a way that maybe, kind of isn't the best, right? But like a lot of our smaller sort of utility apps, we build those knowing they have a shelf life, right? And like a big thing for us is like, we're just trying to improve the lives of people who use HubSpot, right? And even if we can only do that for a small amount of time, we're going to do it, right? Because there's a lot of really good benefits in us for doing it. One, we're learning how to build better apps. Two, we're serving the ecosystem that we love. Three, it's building a lot of great brand awareness and affinity for us because we're solving for these specific headaches that people have, right?
Yeah.
You saw it with TikTok today, right? We put TikTok today out knowing that eventually they would do exactly what they just did, right? But we said, hey, a lot of people have this pain. Let's solve for it right now while we can. And we kept it free, right? Except if you were doing multiple objects, it was just $9 a month for like an additional type, right? But, that's why we have like a multi-product strategy, right? We don't just build one app. We have like 8, right? And so the whole idea there is that when we build multiple apps, if HubSpot comes out with something that deplatforms us, right, we can still survive. But that's also why you start seeing us build apps that just have a whole bunch of functionality that can't just be knocked over by one single, feature, right? Like our whole CPQ tool that we just built, right? HubSpot would have to come out with quoting rules, price books, and completely change the way approvals work on quotes for them to kind of knock us down. But also in situations like that, like we talk to HubSpot and we get a lot of direction of like where they're going. And everyone can do this, right? It's not like HubSpot, product people are inaccessible.
Right,
Like they
right.
talk to the ecosystem and they tell the ecosystem what they need, right? They've made it very clear to us in no uncertain terms that they want the ecosystem to solve for CPQ. And that makes a ton of sense because one, CPQ means something different to everybody, right? And even if you do have a standard definition of it, every company is going to do it differently because CPQ can be infinitely complex depending on how complex, how big, how small, how different, how whatever your business is, right? So it makes sense in that area that there's these certain places where HubSpot says, hey, we're going to give a basic offering. Just like your iPhone gives you a basic offering for your mail and your calendar app, right? But then we're going to allow the ecosystem to expand on it for folks who need something bigger and more customizable, right? And so, like, quote happily, we're very confident that that's going to be out there. It's going to kind of exist as its own thing. HubSpot's not going to build something that's going to knock that down. They've gone as far as they want to go with quotes, and they've made that very, very clear to us, right? Even with the event stuff, right? We're really close to the people that are talking about like the finally taking the marketing events object and turning it into something usable, right? And that's not going to knock down event happily. That's going to give us the object we wanted marketing events to always be so we can build on top of it. Because when it comes to something like event management, oh, brother, does it go 1,000 layer deeper than just having an object that represents an event?
Yes.
You betcha, right?
Yes.
There's QR codes, attendance tracking. There is multi-person ticket registration and pay ticket registration and all these things that HubSpot is never going to do, right? That we can layer into that. And the beauty of it is we have this native object now that people are already using that works really well with everything, right? So like that's going to be awesome for us. Like when they finally get that marketing events object to where it needs to be and we can tie on to the thing that they're going to use. It's kind of like the registrant object that we use now. We can't wait for that because that means it'll be more accessible to a lot of folks. It'll not have to be like another redundant object. We can just hook into the one that they're already using, right? But then we can add our elevated experience around it. Like when we think about why we name our products the way we name them, right? Quote happily, event happily, right? Whatever the next thing is going to be, right? We're using the word happily as a term to say this is the elevated version of this experience or the way you do this thing inside of HubSpot. And that's what we're trying to find, right? Is like, how can we take something that's like not necessarily a great experience or something that HubSpot doesn't do that well, right? And elevate it to a point where you're doing it happily, right? That's kind of the idea. Yeah. Shout out to Nikki and Connor and Dax and all those folks that, just we bit the bullet and changed the name. That's kind of the big thing that we're looking to do is like, what's the improved, better, elevated version of doing that thing inside of HubSpot? And quote happily is a great example of that, right? There's quoting already in HubSpot, but what's like the better, more elevated, upmarket version of doing that that's going to be better for a lot of folks? And, that's kind of what we're thinking of.
I guess we'll have to have another chat just about the community aspect of the ecosystem to finish. But I think that's also like everything you just talked about. If you're engaged in part of Jeff's question was how do you participate? And like if you participate, you're usually in a position to benefit whenever HubSpot develops the product in whichever direction. Like that's how you understand what the roadmap looks like, engaging with HubSpot and building it into the product, right? Instead of as like an attachment over here, like it forces you to understand and talk to the right people and make sure it's aligned with what's happening, talking to the partners of the ecosystem, aligning with what they're seeing in the market. But then interacting with end users in the community, at Inbound, online through events like this. Like it's there for you. It's there for you if you want to. And at that point, as I had aspirations of developing stuff, especially when it comes to objects, it's like, yeah, please HubSpot, please do this. Cause then it gets supported, then they develop into it. And then we can focus on bigger and better things, right? And just continuing that. Obviously, if you're running a business based on product, you got to do that in a way that's going to make sure you survive those cycles, because you don't always know when HubSpot's going to make a move necessarily. But that's where you just have relationships with all the people involved and all the stakeholders, and you can get a pretty good idea. So, and you're just one with the ecosystem. And I don't think that it's an accident that also describes this last layer of connected this is what connected ecosystem means. Like so many of these things, especially as more and more app providers come in from other ecosystems, the other ecosystems do not work this way.
No.
Right. So that's our, Jeff, and other nonprofits watching, you might have an experience from other ecosystems. If you want to have your voice heard, there's lots of opportunities to participate. I think it will be great to have another conversation just focused on community. There's lots of things happening. LinkedIn, Sprocketeer, Connect.com, lots of new ways to participate. So
yeah. Next time we talk about apps, though, we should play a game where we get to pick an app or two and then give it a fake commercial. Like, I can't help but end this with that. When I did that search for the 1,558 app results, that I'm sitting here looking at a couple names, and I'm just, again, I'm a goofball, but I'm like, man, that sounds like a rock band, Data Slayer. And I'm like, okay, yep, opening up for Whitesnake. Or then there's this other one I'm looking at, and it's Revium, and I immediately go, may induce like anyway, we should
talk to
really
your doctor before installing Revium.
Yeah, exactly. So
Side effects.
I think we could have some fun with just the names of the apps in the ecosystem, which, by the way, they're both dope as far as like what they say they will help you do, but naming is everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for stopping by today, Max. I think this was an awesome conversation. Thanks
for having me. It was fun.
Do it every month. We'll see if we can get Dylan on 1 month notice next month to finish off, if they let us and they stop adding layers, which they might not, but next one is going to be AI. Got to address that elephant in the room. So appreciate everybody for stopping by, and we'll talk to you next month. Thanks,
everybody. Thanks, Max.
Thanks.